All right, so let's get right into it today. Today's deep dive is all about warming up and how it can help us prevent injuries. We've got some really interesting stuff to dig into today. Articles from Muscle and Motion Shore Physicians Group. And we'll be looking at some specific warm-up exercises from reality pathing. So if you're looking to optimize your workouts and stay injury-free, well, this deep dive is definitely for you. We're going to break down the science behind warming up, look at different types of warm-ups, and maybe even bust a few myths along the way.
One thing that really jumped out at me right away was that the whole idea of warming up has been debated for years. Muscle and Motion actually points this out in their article, saying that some people swear by it, while others question if it's really necessary.
Yeah, I've definitely heard both sides of that argument myself. But before we get into whether or not we should be warming up, maybe we should start with the basics. Like, what exactly do we even mean by warming up? What are the different types?
Well, Muscle and Motion breaks it down into four main types: general, dynamic, static, and specific.
Okay, so let's unpack those a bit. General warm-up. I guess that's pretty self-explanatory. Just getting the body moving.
Yeah, exactly. Think light jogging, jumping jacks.
Yeah,
Anything that'll get your heart rate up a little bit and start to increase blood flow to the muscles.
gotcha. So then there's dynamic stretching. I always think of this as like a little dance routine before my workout.
Haha, that's a great way to put it. So things like leg swings, arm circles, torso twists, those kinds of movements that take your joints through a full range of motion and help improve flexibility.
So how is that different from static stretching, like when you just hold a stretch for, say, 30 seconds?
Right. So with static stretching, you're focusing more on lengthening the muscles and improving flexibility. But it's not really about preparing your body for the dynamic movements you'll be doing during your workout.
Okay, that makes sense. And then we have specific warm-ups. So that's where you're doing movements that are really similar to whatever activity you're about to do, right?
Exactly. So for example, a tennis player might do some practice swings. A swimmer might do some arm strokes, or a power lifter might start with lighter weights. It's about getting your body ready for the specific demands of your chosen activity.
Makes sense. So we've got these different types of warm-ups. Now let's dive into the science behind why they might actually help prevent injuries. What's going on in our bodies when we warm up?
Well, Muscle and Motion gets into the physiology here. They explain that warming up increases blood flow to your muscles, which helps deliver oxygen and nutrients. It's like fueling up your muscles before you put them to work.
So it's kind of like making sure those muscles have everything they need to perform at their best.
Exactly. And it's not just about fuel either.
Yeah.
Increased blood flow also helps remove waste products that build up in the muscles during exercise. So that can help reduce muscle fatigue and soreness later on.
Interesting. I never really thought about it that way. I always thought of warming up as just loosening up my muscles, but it sounds like there's a lot more to it.
There definitely is. Another important point that Muscle Motion brings up is that warming up actually increases your muscle temperature. And that makes them more elastic. Think of it like a rubber band.
Yeah.
A cold rubber band is more likely to snap when you stretch it,
Right.
but a warm one is much more pliable.
Oh, yeah, that's a great analogy. So warmer muscles are less likely to tear or strain when we're exercising.
Precisely.
Right.
And in addition to that, warming up also improves your range of motion. So your movements are smoother and less likely to cause injury. And it can enhance muscle coordination. So your brain and muscles are communicating more effectively.
So basically, better communication equals faster reaction times and more efficient movement overall.
You got it. And Muscle and Motion even cites a study that was done on sprinters, which found that warming up could reduce the risk of hamstring strains. So there's real evidence to back up these claims.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But Muscle in Motion also makes it clear that warming up isn't some kind of magic shield. It's not going to prevent every single injury. There are other factors that come into play as well.
Absolutely. Warming up is just one piece of the puzzle. You can think of it as laying a strong foundation, but you still need all the other parts to create a stable building.
I like that analogy. So what are some of the other building blocks of injury prevention that we need to be aware of?
Well, one of the most crucial factors is training load. And this is something that Muscle and Motion emphasizes throughout their article. You just can't go from zero to hero overnight. You have to gradually increase the intensity and volume of your workouts over time.
So when we talk about training load, are we talking about the overall amount of stress that we're putting on our bodies during workouts?
Exactly. It includes things like the duration, intensity, and frequency of your training.
Yeah.
And if you ramp up that training load too quickly, you're putting yourself at a higher risk of injury.
So it's like that saying, Rome wasn't built in a day. You got to give your body time to adapt and get stronger.
Exactly. And just as important as pushing ourselves is giving our bodies enough rest and recovery time.
You know, that's something I personally struggle with sometimes. It's hard to find that balance between wanting to push harder and knowing when to rest and let my body recover.
Yeah, I think we all struggle with that to some extent.
Yeah.
But recovery is crucial. It allows your muscles to repair and rebuild, replenishes your energy stores, and it helps prevent burnout. Think of it like recharging your batteries.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's not just about warming up before each workout, it's about managing our training load, making recovery a priority, and just taking a more holistic approach to our training overall.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that everyone is different. Individual factors like genetics, biomechanics, previous injuries, and even stress levels can all play a role in your risk of getting injured.
So what works for one person might not work for someone else. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. And muscle and motion also points out that there's always going to be some level of risk inherent in any physical activity, no matter how well you warm up, how carefully you manage your training load, or how much you prioritize recovery. You can't completely eliminate the possibility of getting hurt.
That's a good point. I guess it's all about minimizing those risks as much as we can.
Exactly. And now to bring in another perspective, let's look at this article from Shore Physicians Group. They interviewed Dr. Dante Marconi, an orthopedic surgeon who offers some really interesting insights on warming up.
Oh, that's great. I'm always curious to hear what medical professionals have to say. What stood out to you from Dr. Marconi's perspective?
Well, he really emphasized the importance of warming up, not just for performance, but for long-term joint and muscle health. He's basically saying it's about protecting your body in the long run, not just about avoiding immediate injuries.
So it's an investment in our future mobility, not just about squeezing in a quick workout today.
Exactly. And you know what? Dr. Marconi actually uses that same rubber band analogy we were talking about earlier. He says that warming up those muscles makes them more flexible and less likely to snap, which is what can lead to more serious injuries.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So what does Dr. Marconi recommend for a good warm-up routine?
He breaks it down into 3 key components: light cardiodynamic stretching and sport-specific movements, which, as you can see, aligns perfectly with what we've been talking about so far.
I love it when it all comes together like that. Now, I'm curious about his thoughts on cooling down, which I think is something a lot of people tend to overlook.
It's definitely just as important as warming up. It helps your body transition back to a resting state. And you know what? Dr. Marconi actually explains that skipping the cool down can cause blood to pool in your muscles, which can lead to dizziness or even fainting.
Wow, that doesn't sound good at all.
No kidding. And it's not just about preventing those immediate issues. Cooling down can also help reduce muscle soreness and stiffness later on. It's like giving your body a chance to unwind after a workout.
So what would you say a good cool down looks like based on Dr. Marconi's recommendations?
He recommends combining light cardio or movement to bring your heart rate down gradually, and then doing some static stretching, holding those stretches for 20 to 30 seconds each to allow the muscles to really relax and lengthen.
Makes sense. And of course, we can't forget about hydration. Replenishing those fluids and electrolytes is a key part of recovery, too. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the science behind warming up, the different types, the importance of managing our training load and prioritizing recovery. And we even got some expert insights from an orthopedic surgeon. But now let's get into some specifics. Reality Pathing has this great article where they list 7 warm-up exercises that they say are especially helpful for preventing injuries.
That's a great segue. Which exercises from that list caught your eye?
Well, there are quite a few that I thought were really interesting. First off, we have dynamic stretching, which we already talked about. All those fluid movements like leg swings, arm circles, and torso twists, like a little pre-workout dance routine to get your body moving.
I love that description. And of course, we can't forget about high knees and butt kicks. Those are classics for a reason. They really get your heart rate up and activate those lower body muscles, especially your hamstrings and glutes, which are so important for so many different movements.
Yeah. Now, I'm definitely guilty of skipping those sometimes. But they do make a difference, especially high knees. They kind of mimic the running motion, so they're perfect for any kind of cardio workout.
And then there are lunges with a twist, which are great for working on your balance and core strength at the same time.
Oh, I like that. It's like a multitasking warm-up.
Yeah.
I can see how that would be beneficial. What else stood out to you?
I think arm crossovers are a really underrated warm-up exercise. They're great for loosening up your shoulders and improving upper body mobility, which is important for everything from lifting weights to just maintaining good posture throughout the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's skipping. It might seem kind of silly, but it's actually a fantastic way to get your heart rate up and engage a lot of different muscle groups. Plus, it's fun, and it's a good way to work on your coordination and rhythm.
I think people underestimate the power of skipping. It's a great warm-up exercise, and it brings back some childhood memories too. And last but not least, we have leg cradles. I'm a big fan of these personally. They're amazing for improving hip flexibility and reducing tightness in your hip flexors, which is something that a lot of runners and people who sit for long periods tend to struggle with.
Oh, I've heard of those. Can you explain a little bit more about how they specifically benefit runners and jumpers?
Sure. So when your hip flexors are tight, it can really restrict your stride length and limit your power output when you're running or jumping. Leg cradles help to lengthen those muscles, which can improve your range of motion and potentially reduce your risk of injuries like hip flexor strains or groin pulls. They also help to improve stability and balance in your hip joint, which is really important for preventing those awkward landings that can lead to knee or ankle injuries.
That makes a lot of sense. And of course, reality pathing reminds us that the best warm-up routine is one that's tailored to your individual needs and the specific activity you're doing.
Exactly. It's not about just blindly following a list of exercises. It's about understanding the principles behind warming up and choosing the exercises that make sense for you and your goals.
So experiment, find what works best for you, and don't be afraid to get creative. And if you're ever unsure, it's always a good idea to consult with a fitness professional to get some personalized guidance.
That's great advice. So we've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of like specific warm-up types and exercises, but I think it's important to zoom out a bit and think about the bigger picture of injury prevention.
Yeah, for sure. Like we've established that warming up is definitely a good idea, but as Muscle Emotion pointed out, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. It's like, building a house. Warming up is like laying a strong foundation, but you need all the other elements to make sure the structure is safe and stable.
Okay, I like that analogy. So what are some of those other building blocks of injury prevention that we should be thinking about?
Well, Muscle Emotion highlights several key factors. One that we already touched on is training load. Remember, you can't just go from 0 to 100 without consequences.
Right, it's like expecting to just run a marathon with no training. Our bodies need time to adapt.
Exactly. It's crucial to gradually increase the intensity and volume of your workouts. Pushing yourself is important, of course, but so is giving your body adequate rest and recovery. That means prioritizing things like sleep, nutrition, and active recovery strategies like stretching or foam rolling.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot, that balance between pushing our limits and giving our bodies time to recover and rebuild.
Exactly. It's like recharging your batteries so you can keep performing at your best. And it's important to remember that everyone is different in life. Factors like biomechanics, fitness levels, previous injuries, and even stress levels can all affect your risk of getting injured.
So basically what works for one person might not work for another. We can't just take a cookie cutter approach.
Right. And Muscle Emotion also points out that no matter how well you warm up or how perfectly you plan your training, there's always going to be some level of risk involved in any physical activity.
That's true. I guess we can't eliminate risk entirely, but we can definitely minimize it.
Exactly. And that's what these strategies are all about. So we've been talking a lot about acute injuries, like those sudden strains or sprains.
Huh?
But this article from Reality Pathing got me thinking about overuse injuries as well.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Overuse injuries can be a bit more subtle, and they tend to sneak up on you over time.
Exactly. They develop gradually because of repetitive stress or strain on your muscles, tendons, and joints.
So how can we protect ourselves from overuse injuries?
Well, a lot of the same principles apply. Proper warm-up and cool-down, gradual increases in training load, adequate rest and recovery, and of course listening to your body. Those are all crucial.
But are there any additional things we should keep in mind specifically for overuse injuries?
Yes, definitely. One of the most important things is proper technique. If you're using incorrect form when you're exercising, you can put a lot of extra stress on certain joints and muscles, which makes you more vulnerable to overuse injuries.
It's like if you keep hammering a nail at a slight angle, eventually you're going to bend the nail or damage the wood.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. So it's really important to learn proper technique from qualified professionals, like a personal trainer, a coach, or a physical therapist. They can help you identify any imbalances or weaknesses and teach you how to move correctly and safely.
And speaking of imbalances, addressing any muscle weaknesses or tightness is also important for preventing overuse injuries, right?
Absolutely. You can think of tight muscles as like short, restrictive ropes, and weak muscles as loose, unstable ones. Both can throw off your body's alignment and put extra stress on certain areas.
So it's about finding that balance between flexibility and strength.
Exactly. Regular stretching and flexibility exercises can help counteract tightness, while strength training can help you build a more balanced and resilient body overall.
It's like reinforcing the supports of a bridge. Stronger muscles act as those supports, helping to distribute the load more evenly and protect your joints from excessive wear and tear.
I love that visualization. Now, Reality Pathing's article didn't really get into the psychological side of things, but I think it's worth mentioning that factors like stress and burnout can also contribute to overuse injuries.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, when we're stressed, our muscles tend to tense up, which can increase our risk of injury. And when we're feeling burnt out or pressured, we're more likely to push ourselves too hard or ignore those early warning signs of pain or discomfort.
It's like we're running on empty, both physically and mentally, and that's not a good recipe for staying injury-free.
Exactly. So in addition to all the physical strategies we've discussed, it's also important to take care of our mental health. Things like mindfulness, stress management techniques, and setting realistic goals can all help us avoid pushing ourselves to the point of injury.
It's all about finding that sweet spot where we can challenge ourselves without putting ourselves at risk. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the science of warming up to the complexities of overuse injuries. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the key takeaway is that injury prevention is a multifaceted journey. It's not just about doing a few stretches before you work out or icing your muscles afterwards. It's about taking a holistic approach that considers your physical, mental, and even emotional well-being.
It's an ongoing process of learning, adapting, and finding what works best for you.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so fascinating. There's always more to discover and explore, so keep asking questions, keep seeking knowledge, and most importantly, keep prioritizing your health.
Well, we've been on quite a journey today, haven't we? Exploring everything from the science of warming up to those more complex overuse injuries. I feel like I've learned so much.
It's been a really fascinating discussion. I think our listeners are walking away with some great tools to build their own injury prevention strategy.
I hope so. So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that warming up isn't just some optional extra step. It's a vital part of preparing your body for activity and minimizing your risk of those acute injuries. You know, the sudden strains and sprains that can happen.
Yeah, it's like investing in your performance and your long-term health all at the same time. And speaking of investments, we can't forget about the cool down either.
Right. It's so important for recovery, reducing soreness, and helping your body transition back to a resting state. It's like giving your body a little thank you after a tough workout.
I like that. And of course, as we discussed, injury prevention goes way beyond just warming up and cooling down. It's about that holistic approach, managing your training load, prioritizing recovery, proper technique, addressing muscle imbalances, and even being mindful of your mental and emotional well-being.
Exactly. It's like creating this tapestry of healthy habits, each one playing a crucial role in supporting the overall picture.
I love that. And it's so important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to injury prevention. We all have different bodies, different needs, and different goals.
Absolutely. What works for one person might not work for another. And sometimes that means seeking guidance from qualified professionals, like a physical therapist or a certified strength and conditioning coach.
For sure. Those experts can help you figure out what's best for your individual needs. Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to those overuse injuries we were talking about. We talked about prevention, but what happens if you start experiencing those aches and pains that just won't go away?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, it's something that a lot of us experience at some point.
Yeah, those overuse injuries can be sneaky. They can really creep up on you over time.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to those early warning signs and address them before they turn into something more serious.
So what are some red flags that we shouldn't ignore?
Well, any kind of persistent pain that lingers even after rest is a big one. It's your body's way of telling you that something's not right.
It's like an alarm bell going off, letting you know there's a potential problem.
And it's not just pain either. Things like swelling stiffness, decreased range of motion, or feeling weak or unstable in a joint. Those can all be signs that something's up.
So basically, don't try to push through it. Ignoring those symptoms will only make things worse in the long run.
Exactly. So what should you do if you start experiencing those nagging aches and pains? Well, the first step is to rest and modify your activity. Give your body a chance to heal.
It's like hitting the pause button on your training. And ice can be helpful for reducing inflammation too, right?
Yeah, ice could be good for those acute flare-ups. But if the pain lasts for more than a few days, or if it's really severe, definitely see a doctor or a physical therapist.
They can help you figure out what's going on and come up with a treatment plan. which might include things like manual therapy exercises or even things like ultrasound or electrical stimulation.
And just as importantly, they can teach you how to safely return to activity and prevent those injuries from coming back.
Awesome. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've covered a lot of information today, but the most powerful tool you have in this journey is your own awareness.
That's so true. It's all about tuning in to your body, listening to its signals,
Hmm.
and respecting its limits.
Exactly. Pay attention to how you're feeling. Notice any pain or discomfort. And don't be afraid to adjust your training or seek help when you need it.
It's about taking care of yourself and making choices that support your long-term health and well-being.
And remember, injury prevention is a journey, not a destination. It's about constantly learning, adapting, and finding new ways to take care of your body.
Love it. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep moving.
That's a wrap on another deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, stay curious and keep those bodies moving.